Welcome to my lecture on Allan Hazlett's paper, How to Defend Response Moralism. In this paper, we can expect to define and discuss response moralism. We're going to explore the argument in favor of response moralism by diving deeper into the premises and the defense. And we're also going to explore the conclusion that Hazlett reaches. Hazlett defines response moralism as the view that some emotional responses to fiction are morally right and morally wrong. The strongest argument against response moralism is the reality argument, which states that morality concerns how we think about, feel about, and treat other people, and that a person's emotional responses to the content of a fiction are not emotional responses to other people, but to the fiction. Therefore, a person's emotional responses to the content of a fiction cannot be morally right or morally wrong. If we are to accept this argument, then delighting in the suffering of a fictional character is not the same as delighting in the suffering of a real person. Hazlitt's defense of response moralism is to reject premise 2. He thinks that all works of fiction contain non-fictional content. To illustrate this point, he introduces two principles, the import principle and the export principle. The import principle states that for all true principles in a similarity class, assume that the principle is true in the fiction unless you already know the principle is false in that fiction. The export principle is similar, slightly different. It states, for all principles in a similarity class that are true in that fiction, assume that principle is true, unless you already know it is false. An example of the import principle is in Lord of the Rings. They don't explicitly deal with banking or the idea that food is needed to survive. They don't specifically say that, but we import that idea from our reality. Likewise, the export principle works the other way. As described by Tamara Gendler, we have not lived in the 19th century, but through various works of fiction, we can have an idea of how women wore their hair or the distance between two cities. This brings us to Hazlitt's argument. Starts with premise 1, that all fiction is true in reality unless it is known to be false in reality. If all fiction is true in reality, it is known to be false in reality. If all fiction is true in reality until it is known to be false in reality, then all fiction contains aspects of reality. An aspect of reality can include a broad range of features, including landscape, character behavior, physiology, psychology, and events. Premise 3 states that all fiction contains aspects of reality. This is based off of those first two premises. If all fiction contains aspects of reality, then a person's emotional responses to fiction are emotional responses to other people or real events, i.e., reality. Therefore, a person's emotional responses to the content of a fiction are emotional responses to other people or real events. If a person's emotional responses to the content of fiction are emotional responses to other people or real events, then some emotional responses to fiction are morally right and others are morally wrong. So, given those last two premises, some emotional responses to fiction are morally right and others morally wrong. If some emotional responses to fiction are morally right and others are morally wrong, then response moralism is true. Therefore, response moralism is true.